Just a warning before we begin, the following segment contains content that some viewers may find distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back, everybody, to Frontlines and Faultlines with Mike Kelly. It's wonderful to have you back with us. We've been so fortunate to have so many interesting people to talk to on this program, but there'll be none more interesting than the person who's chimed in with me today, which is Lord Andrew Roberts, who's a parliamentarian of the House of Lords in Great Britain, but really, apart from his political career, there's so much more to this person, and it's incredibly impressive. It's one of those people that really make you feel inadequate when you talk about what they've done. And in particular, Lord Roberts has produced an amazing body of work in his research. He's written something like 20 books that have been translated into 28 different languages. And he's also currently and keeps maintaining his engagement in academia, which builds upon his PhD in history that I believe he obtained from Cambridge University. So just one of those small little colleges somewhere over in the UK. And it's beyond that, they're continuing to take advantage of his expertise and work as a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and a visiting professor at the War Studies Department at King's College in London. So it's an incredibly impressive record that you have there, Andrew. I'm really delighted to have you with us. But the thing we really wanted to talk about today was this amazing study the UK Parliament did, which you led, into the events of the 7th of October 2023. And the unfortunate thing about the world at the moment is that we find a definite dumbing down of situations. The mainstream media seems to love to try and turn things into 30-second grabs or paint things in simplistic terms. So we have this black hat, white hat syndrome. And if you fall into that categorization, then everything has to be painted in that way that reinforces the simplicity of that. And we know, and you know only too well, just how complex the Middle East is. And what I've been so impressed with reading the study that you led is the detail that you went into, the forensic nature of establishing the facts and the truth behind every finding and assertion made in the report. And it just doesn't get surfaced enough. And to understand anything about this conflict, you really do need to understand the 7th of October and the background to it and the detail of it. And so thank you so much for helping us with this. And, we really would love to hear you give the background to this situation, talk us through the detail of what happened on the 7th of October.
Well, you're very kind, Mike, and thank you very much for having me on the show, and obviously for your kind words. Yes, the 7th of October Parliamentary Commission was a group of historians who were essentially backed by the all-party parliamentary group on Israel, so non-partisan House of Commons and House of Lords group that wanted a report on exactly what happened, pretty much minute by minute, for the 48 hours between the attack in the early morning of Saturday, the 7th of October, through to the last moment, about 48 hours later, when the final terrorists left the envelope and went back into Gaza. So taking with them, obviously, 251 hostages. And so what we thought was the best thing to do was obviously to go there, go to the kibbutzim, such as Kfar Aza, and to interview people and to try to work out a timeline, as I say, about what happened where. So there were over 30 kibbutzim and 2 cities that were attacked. They were attacked every way that you could possibly imagine, as we all know, of course, by hang glider, but also underwater. was one way that the Hamas terrorists attacked Israel, and primarily, of course, by smashing through the gates. And so it was very hard work, actually. A lot of historians working hard and putting together the facts. And we came to these facts from dozens of different sources, including police reports, of course, and video using the GoPro cameras
Mm.
that the Hamas terrorists themselves put up on social media. Tremendously useful. It's quite ironic in a way that they're now claiming that the 7th of October never happened.
Mm.
There's a denialism that's started up about the 7th of October, which is pretty ironic considering that the major evidence that we have for it, really, or at least one of them, is their own GoPro cameras. And we put together this report of well over 300 pages, completely backed up with footnotes and factual bases to point out. We'd go into the circumstances of the deaths of all 1,182 people that day who were murdered, and of course also the sexual abuse and mass rapes and gang rapes and so on that also took place that day. And together, it's a pretty crushing indictment, obviously, of the terrorists.
Hmm. So, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that you confronting this issue of denial. It's sort of reminiscent of the denial of the Holocaust in many ways, but I've heard so many perverted aspects of that, conspiratorial rabbit holes of talking to demonstrators who say it never happened, or that it was committed by Mossad or the IDF, etc. Just incredible,
Mm.
and denying.
And also, you're so right to equate it to Holocaust denial because, of course, it springs from exactly the same anti-Semitic feeling. But the difference is that the Holocaust, which of course the Nazis tried to hide,
Mhm.
rather than actually use GoPro cameras to boast
Mm.
about. But it took years for Holocaust denial to get going. It wasn't really until the 1950s, 1960s, and certainly by the 1970s. So that's a good 25 years after the end of the Second World War.
Right.
Whereas this denialism and also glorification. The interesting thing is they glorified it and denied it at the same time, which you would have thought might be counterintuitive, but nonetheless, Hamas's supporters do that. This actually started before the massacres even ended. We had only 3 hours into the attacks. The Palestinian Action Group and the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign asked the Metropolitan Police for permission to demonstrate outside the Israeli embassy in London. This was only 3 hours after it had started, and there was another 40 plus hours for it to continue.
Mm.
Um, and they had already got their sort of lines of attack worked out with regard to the demonstration.
Hmm. And of course, it comes from a background, and this is one of the things that we're doing a deep dive on, as the historical background to Gaza, the specific situation, which we've been highlighting is different from a consideration of the West Bank that needs to be understood. But the situation that evolved, and for my sins, when I was in the army, in strategy group in our defence force, I had the Middle East desk. And so at the time of 2005, I was attempting to assist the Palestinian Authority build its security sector by contributing Australian Army personnel to US General Ward's team. And there was a lot of effort being invested by the international community to raise the civil service, the sinews of the state for a potential Palestinian state. All blown out of the water, of course, quite literally by the civil war in 2007, between Fatah and Hamas, where 600 Palestinians were killed, and that entire effort that we invested so much treasure in and time and effort
Yeah.
was dismantled, and 40,000 police and public service were put out of work, still
Mhm.
to this day. So, but from that point, that 2007 point, Hamas was in control, and
Yeah.
and then could you just sort of give us a thumbnail sketch of what evolved from that point through to 2023?
Yes. Well, I mean, as you better than anybody else will know, they came to power um, with a coup against Fatah, which was a particularly violent and vicious coup. Killed a lot of Fatah politicians and soldiers. And then they held an election. Typically, for totalitarians, only one election was ever going to be held, but they won it. And so, which in a sense does make you question the Palestinian people, because to vote for a terrorist organization that they must have known was dedicated to the destruction of Israel could only have meant one thing, which was ultimately war. And so you are from 2007. You're correct to put that to put the finger on that date. Israel and Hamas government of Gaza were on a collision course. Um, and the whole thing really stems from the decision of the Israelis to pull out of Gaza in 2005, a decision which, in retrospect, looks a, a somewhat
Mm.
over hasty one when one thinks about what happened so soon afterwards.
Yeah, at least from a
After
security presence.
2007, sorry?
At least from a security presence perspective, at the very least.
Precisely, yes,
Mm.
absolutely. No, I'm thinking entirely in terms
Mhm.
of the prevention of
Mhm.
occasions like the 7th of October. Um, but when you have a totalitarian terrorist regime in charge of a country, they are able to dedicate absolutely everything. Essentially, it's sort of total war as as far as they're concerned, to what the next stage will be. And so they were able to divert billions of dollars, much of it actually given by the West and by countries like Australia and America and Britain
Mm.
and so
The
on,
EU.
um, to to building these tunnels, this extraordinary network of 500 miles or so of tunnels underneath Gaza, which have been the major problem, really, military problem for the IDF since the IDF attacked Gaza on the 28th of October,
Mhm.
2023.
Right. So obviously, this huge military capability infrastructure, the training of kids as young as 12 to be effectively the Hamas Hitler youth of our day, and it's all there. And they've developed this very careful plan, and they've obviously had massive support from Iran to develop the capabilities and wherewithal and the training for all of this.
Mm.
So precisely what happened on the 7th of October to initiate, how did they initiate the attack? What sort of forces were engaged from the Hamas side on this endeavor?
Well, if I can just comment on one of your points there, you're so right. The engagement of 12-year-olds and above in the military aspect of all this is very important. And the reason that they were able to do that is, of course, because the education system in Gaza was entirely turned over, or at least largely turned over, to teaching anti-Semitism to children, small children, as they pretty much as soon as they learn anything, they learn that Jews are no better than dogs and rats and need to be exterminated. And so you have this massive indoctrination, which is it was why you're very perceptive by equating it with Hitler Youth, because of course that's exactly what the German education system did with regard to the Jews also in Nazi Germany. Um, to go on to the day itself, um, a few minutes before 6 a.m., you had a um, very well advanced, very well trained, essentially, very well thought through plan go into split second accuracy It's no one can deny that that Hamas certainly did their intelligence work. They had been planning this for over 2 years. They were extremely efficient when it came to the undertaking of this. They were able to block the sensors that were used on the Israeli defense side. They were able to smash through the barriers. They were able to kill and kidnap border guards. They were able to fly over, as I mentioned earlier, and swim under um, defenses. It was a very impressive, just looking at it just from a sheer military point of view, very impressive surprise attack. And it was timed, of course, to take part at the same time as a religious festival that some IDF soldiers went home for. It also took place, of course, at the same time as two music festivals where they knew young people were going to be, and they particularly Hamas particularly like killing young people because it's all the more painful, of course, for a country like Israel, where there are very few people essentially, and it's not a heavily populated country, and so young people are the absolute lifeblood of that country, and so they adore the chance to kill children, and it was a lightning strike. Now, surprise attacks do happen a lot in history. It was Paul Wolfowitz who said after 9/11 that surprise attacks happen so often in history that the surprising thing is that we're still surprised by them.
Mm.
And that is correct. But the way that this worked, of course, they use the tunnel system in order to get um, close to the gates, uh, and also to bring up all the stores and ammunition and supplies and weaponry and so on, everything they needed, so that when the places were breached, and I have in the report a map showing exactly where they were breached and in which
Yes.
areas they were breached. Um, it was possible for some 6,000 or so. We don't know the exact numbers. Some very reputable writers claim up to 8,000, certainly 6,000, and not just Hamas fighters, but also fighters from half a dozen or so extra affiliated jihadist organizations that operate in Gaza.
Hmm.
Um, and they came in three specific waves. The first wave were the Hamas um, uh, trained
Right.
terrorists.
That was the
Then
Nukba
after
Brigade,
that,
or
the Nakba Brigade were the first people through, exactly that. Then after that, you have the militias essentially, not so well trained, but nonetheless just as fanatical, and actually in many ways more interested in the torture and the rape and the degradation, sexual degradation, and so on, than the actual Nakba Brigade, who were primarily interested in killing, as I say, killing children and taking large numbers of hostages.
Mhm.
And then finally, the last group, again, no specific numbers for this, were ordinary Palestinians Gazans, who, when they saw what was going on and heard what was going on, and it was broadcast to them, they thought, well, why not? Let's get on a motorbike or in a car and go over and loot and rob and murder and pillage. So it was well organized, it's split second timing, um, and it was very um, stratified, as it were, between when the first wave goes, when the second wave goes,
Mhm.
and then finally when they just open the gates to anybody who wanted to go into southern Israel and cause trouble.
Right. And I guess what's really interesting too is any conversation around strategic depth in Israel needs to take into account that exactly how long was it from the first attempts to breach the fence till they arrived in their first kibbutz?
Seconds,
Right.
because Kavar Azar, which was the first of the kibbutz to be
Mm.
attacked, it borders the border fence. When you go there, you don't need binoculars or anything. You can just see the fence just a matter of a few hundred yards away.
Right. So,
And what they did there is very interesting as well, because they had very good intelligence, from Palestinians who'd been working in the kibbutz. There are a lot of people who, of course, were invited as guest workers and were paid to work in the kibbutzes.
mhm,
And so these people told Hamas in incredible detail about how to attack Kfar Aza. You had, you know, down to whether the chap in charge of the defense unit there
mhm,
slept on the right or the left-hand side of his bed,
right.
where his weapons were kept, where the
Mhm,
where the kibbutzim arsenal was. And so these guys, the Hamas terrorists, when they attacked, went straight for the key places, and had maps of everything that they needed to know.
mhm,
So it wasn't just sort of people on the rampage by any means.
mhm.
It was a very structured operation.
Right. And you detailed the sorts of weaponry and ordnance that Hamas were equipped with, and usual suspects were those sources were in terms of Russia, China, North Korea, those type of pattern weapons. But a revealing.
Belarus, the whole of but actually not just them as well. Some quite a lot of Western weaponry
Mhm.
in there as well.
Right. But the interesting and revealing thing to me was you detailed the frame ordnance to particularly designed to open up the safe rooms in the kibbutzim. Only purpose for that would be.
To kill civilians, of
Mm,
course, exactly, who are taking refuge in these safe rooms. It's every house has to have a safe room by law in Israel, and some of them are pretty impressive things. They're thick steel. Um, Locked rooms that are not easy to get into. So what the terrorists did was, as you say, to invent a special kind of frame that could be placed against the door, and then the explosive devices smash down the door so that the terrorists can then throw in grenades or machine gun anybody inside the safe rooms.
mhm.
Yeah, there was a hell of a lot of not just thought went into it, but technological sort of quite advanced technological expertise.
So that's, I guess, what we talk about as the tactics, techniques, and procedures (TTP). But stepping.
I wonder if I could just say, sorry
Sure.
to butt in, Mike, but I wonder if I could just say one other thing, which was came as quite a surprise when we went to see the collections of weapons that were either left or taken when the IDF finally counterattacked. Amongst these things were also showing a tremendous amount of premeditation when it came to the hostage taking. There were um, little units, small little units that were specifically designed for newborn babies to be kidnapped and taken back. Tiny, infants who were only just been born when they sort of incubators essentially. And these had been given, ironically enough, by the Israeli um, people, the Israeli government, to mothers in the hospitals in Gaza, to incubate their children when they were born if they had any problems with them. And they were then taken back into Israel to kidnap Israeli babies.
Just unbelievably shocking that just the fact that they planned that, is just really
The
illustrates.
level of
Yes.
dehumanization necessary to think that up
Yes, the
really
mentality.
is
Yeah.
is in
It's
itself
just shocking.
quite
Mm,
quite demonic.
yes. So, taking all that on board, to step back a bit, in terms of the strategic intent here, and there's been a lot of reporting of some of the material that's been uncovered that relates to the fact that they were meant to kind of keep going and try and get to Hebron and spark an uprising in the West Bank, etc., etc. And that then there was meant to be this pile-on also. They were hoping that the Israeli Arabs would rise up and that then the Iranian galaxy of proxies would open up and really confront Israel with a war on, multiple fronts that would make it difficult for them to concentrate force and the rest of it. So what went wrong with the plan to get to Hebron? Was it the fact that they got into a savagery frenzy when they hit the Nova Festival? What was the story there? And is that accurate?
It is accurate. No, absolutely. They did have plans to get to Hebron. A couple of things happened. First, as you say, the savagery in the Nova Festival distracted some of the, especially people from the second wave. Finally, of course, the IDF, whose communications were comprehensively broken right at the beginning of the attack, did manage to counterattack. But actually, the real reason was, and there were roadblocks put up on the central road that the terrorists needed to use, although that wasn't until an awful lot later. But actually, what happened was ordinary Israelis responded. They didn't wait for orders, and a lot of them just got in their cars, tooled up, and went south to fight the terrorists. And it was this really that took the steam out of the terrorists' attack northwards. Um, we go into this a bit in the report, but actually the kind of natural popular uprising, essentially, of very well armed and very well trained Jews were the thing that blunted at least the savagery of the attack. It was obviously, one of the most terrible days in the history of the Jewish race. However, there are some moments of slithers, essentially, of light. There are some moments of incredible self-sacrifice, incredible courage that were shown by ordinary Israelis that day.
Including some stories I've heard of the first responders trying to render assistance who gave their lives, were unarmed and etc.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
We documented all,
right, yeah, tremendous.
everyone. There's the circumstances of the deaths of all 1,182 innocent people are in the report.
Right. So the degree of the handprint of Iran on this and the facilitation and planning, were you able to really tease any of that out, any of the detail of that out? I know we've seen some evidence appearing of the intent of Iran to really incorporate all of these proxies into their Vilayet resistance of total control by the supreme leader. But what evidence did you see?
We didn't. We know it takes place, of course. But what we were going to ensure with this report is that we only put in things that we could be certain of. We didn't want this report to be rubbished and
Right.
introduced on the basis of our speculation. And so, because there wasn't a smoking gun of communication between Iran and Gaza, owing to, I mean, obviously, the terrorists, many of them were trained
Yes.
in Iran. They were financed very largely by Iran. They are a proxy in every kind of way that you could imagine of Iran's, but we had no evidence, and I don't know that there is any evidence actually, that anybody in Tehran said, right, Saturday the 7th of October 2023 is the time that you're going to attack. It wasn't like that. It was probably, again, one can't be absolutely certain about these things, but probably it was a decision. The actual timing um, of the attack was probably a decision taken by Sinwar, and Tehran probably just, they wanted to be able to be arm's length
Hmm.
because obviously they didn't want the
Yes.
Israelis
Plausible
to
deniability.
respond in the way plausible deniability. It's a sort of well known, especially with a terrorist hub and its proxies.
Right.
That kind of thing is very useful. And as we've seen much more recently, the Israelis do have the capacity to take out
Hmm.
Iranian air defenses and to strike Iran, and obviously Tehran did not want that as a result of this.
Yeah, it seems that since then, the evidence seems to suggest that there were conversations and discussions about how the fight would be taken forward against Israel. But yes, that the discretion was left to Hamas about how it would initiate this so that they could preserve their operational security, which they were very successful at doing. Incredible discipline that they exercised to keep a lid on this, noting too of Israel's own, human intelligence capabilities, and they were shielded effectively through their
Yeah,
procedures.
that's right. And also, of course, they recognized that the Israelis had cracked their comms
Mhm.
system, and so messages were passed um, along the tunnels, handwritten, and so nothing went over the airwaves that allowed Israeli intelligence to spot what was going to happen. It's quite reminiscent, actually, of the Battle of the Bulge, the German offensive in mid-December 1944, when they knew that the Allies were listening and had probably broken their codes, and so all the orders for this massive 39 divisional attack were handed by motorbike. Um,
Right.
rather than going over the airwaves.
Mhm.
It's much more difficult to predict an
Yes.
attack like that, needless to say.
Yeah, a more recent example from my experience was in Somalia, where we're involved in these confrontations with Aidid, Mohammed Farah Aidid. The Americans sent this really sophisticated electronic warfare unit over to, vector him with SIGINT, etc. And the trouble is, he communicated by runners and low-level intercom, and so that unit ended up going home completely,
Yeah.
useless. But well, look, that's a fantastic introduction to this, Andrew. I really appreciate that. And what I'd like to do next time is now talk about the issues that related to what happened in terms of, we're going to get into some hard conversations here, which we'll warn our audience about in terms of the detail of what happened and the atrocities, and then to tease out also the issue relating to UNRWA and what you uncovered there. So thank you for this laying of the foundation, and look forward to following this up next time. So, and thanks for joining us at these hours of your time in London.
You are kind. Thanks very much, Mike.
No worries.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Well, thanks for tuning into this. It's going to be a difficult subject for us, but it is important to know the detail to fight back against the denialism that we have seen in relation to this issue. So we'll welcome you back next time to follow up with this conversation with Lord Roberts. Thank you. Cheers.